Tonight we pull back the velvet curtain on a world of unimaginable wealth and unforgivable betrayal. We're at the Starlight Gala, New York's most exclusive charity event, where titans of industry mingle under crystal chandeliers. Our focus is on Damian Blackwood, a man who commands empire with a single phone call, and his elegant wife, Isabella. But watch closely. See the younger blonde woman in the emerald dress he's pulling onto the dance floor. That's not Isabella. In a room filled with the world's most powerful people, a billionaire is about to make the most public mistake of his life. He thinks he's untouchable. He's wrong. The air in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dender was thick with the scent of money and magnolias. It was the kind of scent that clung to $1,000 suits and couture gowns, a fragrant symbol of the stratosphere inhabited by the attendees of the annual Starlight Gala. This was the pinnacle of New York philanthropy, an evening where fortunes were pledged to the Children's Oncology Fund in between sips of Dom Perignon and bites of caviar-topped blini. And at the center of this glittering universe, holding court like a modern-day emperor, was Damian Blackwood. Damian was a man sculpted from ambition and arrogance. His company, Blackwood Holdings, was a leviathan of private equity with tentacles reaching into global real estate tech startups and media conglomerates. His face, a handsome collection of sharp angles and piercing blue eyes, was a regular feature on the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no and truly believed it was his birthright to own the world. By his side, a perfect counterpart to his raw power, was his wife, Isabella Rossi Blackwood. She was not merely an accessory, she was a masterpiece of old-world grace and new-world intellect. Hailing from the Rossi family, whose name was etched onto the cornerstones of banks and universities across Italy and America, Isabella possessed a quiet strength that often outshone her husband's boisterous charisma. She was the gala's co-chair, her passion for the cause genuine and her work tireless. Her gown, a midnight blue creation by Oscar de la Renta, was understated yet breathtaking, a testament to her impeccable taste. To the casual observer, they were the ultimate power couple. Damian the conqueror, Isabella the queen. But for those who knew where to look, the cracks in the facade were beginning to show. They had been showing for months. The whispers had started as a trickle and were now a quiet flood rushing through the salons of the Upper East Side. They spoke of Amber Sterling. Amber was everything Isabella was not. She was a firework of ambition, a brazen blonde with a razor-sharp mind and a portfolio to match. As the newly appointed vice president of marketing for Blackwood's most profitable tech subsidiary, she was Damian's protege. She was 28, hungry, and had made it clear she didn't just want a seat at the table, she wanted the throne. Tonight she was a vision in a skin-tight emerald sequin dress that seemed to drink the light and demand attention. She laughed a little too loudly, her hand lingered a little too long on Damian's arm, and her eyes, whenever they settled on Isabella from across the room, held a glint of triumphant pity. Isabella saw it all. She had been seeing it for 6 months, ever since the day she found the preliminary designs for a custom diamond necklace, not for her hidden in Damian's home office safe. It wasn't the infidelity that had shattered her. It was the sheer insulting arrogance of it. The way he believed he could have both his perfect, respectable wife and his thrilling, ambitious mistress, keeping them in separate, soundproofed wings of his life. Darling Damian's voice was a low purr in her ear, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Councilman Miller is waving us over. Let's go charm another 50,000 out of him for the fund. Isabella smiled, a perfect practiced curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, my love. She walked with him, a ghost in her own life, nodding and smiling as Damian worked his magic. He was a maestro of manipulation, weaving promises of influence and access with practiced ease. He pledged $1 million from the Blackwood Foundation, and the room erupted in polite, reverent applause. Isabella clapped along with them, her Cartier diamonds feeling like shackles on her wrist. Through the clapping hands, she saw Amber Sterling watching them, a smug little smile playing on her lips. Amber raised her champagne flute in a silent, insolent toast. A toast to the future Mrs. Blackwood. Isabella felt a cold, hard resolve settle in her stomach. It had been building for weeks, a plan born of sleepless nights and quiet fury. She had spent the last month meeting with forensic accountants and the best divorce lawyer in the state, a bulldog named Arthur Vance. But a quiet divorce, a tidy settlement, that wasn't justice. That was a business transaction. Damien dealt in business transactions. He wouldn't understand anything else. Know what he had done required a different kind of currency public humiliation. The orchestra shifted from a classical arrangement to a more modern, soulful ballad. Damien, high on his own success and the adulation of the room, turned to Isabella. "One dance, my dear," he asked, the offer a perfunctory nod to their shared public image. But his eyes weren't on her. They were already scanning the crowd, seeking out the flash of emerald green. "You know, I'm feeling a little tired," Isabella said, her voice smooth as silk. "Why don't you ask someone else? It's a charity ball. You should mingle." It was the permission he was waiting for, though he never truly believed he needed it. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a predatory grin. "If you insist." He didn't even wait for a full reply. He strode across the marble floor, a man on a mission, parting the sea of New York's elite. He walked directly to Amber Sterling. He didn't bow or ask politely. He simply took her hand, his thumb stroking hers in a gesture of intimate ownership, and led her toward the center of the dance floor. A collective silent gasp seemed to suck the air from the room. The whispers became audible murmurs. Heads turned. iPhones previously tucked away were subtly raised. Every eye was on the spectacle. The billionaire, the founder, the husband dancing with his brilliant, beautiful, and very young vice president, while his elegant wife stood watching from the sidelines. Amber melted into his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, her emerald dress a beacon of scandal against his black tuxedo. They moved together perfectly, two bodies molded by the same ruthless ambition. They were not just dancing, they were making a statement. They were announcing a coup. And Isabella stood alone, 20 feet away, the perfect picture of the wronged wife. A few pitying glances were thrown her way. The wife of a prominent banker, Mrs. Albright, even took a tentative step towards her, a condolence on her face. But Isabella didn't see her. Her eyes were locked on the dancing couple. There was no pain on her face, no tears, no humiliation. There was only a chilling, terrifying calm, the look of a general surveying a battlefield moments before giving the order to attack. The performance was about to begin, and she had the starring role. The song was a slow, melancholic rendition of a familiar pop hit, its lyrics about lost love and regret, a bitter irony that hung in the air. As Damien and Amber swayed in the center of the room, they were in their own world, a bubble of mutual adoration and shared power. Damien whispered something in Amber's ear, and she threw her head back and laughed, a bright, carefree sound that echoed Isabella's silent scream. For Isabella, time seemed to slow down. Each turn on the dance floor was a deliberate rotation of a knife in her heart, but it was an old wound, one that had already begun to scar over with something harder and more resilient than flesh purpose. Her mind drifted back not to the good times, but to the moments of chilling clarity. She remembered their 10th anniversary trip to St. Bart's. He had gifted her a stunning sapphire necklace, the heart of the ocean, as the press had cheekily dubbed it. He'd made a beautiful speech at a private dinner about her being his anchor, his North Star. 3 days later, while looking for an aspirin in his travel bag, she found a receipt from a different jeweler in Miami, dated the week before their trip. It was for a pair of emerald earrings. Simple, elegant, expensive. An entirely different style from her own. It was a small thing, a loose thread in a grand tapestry, but it was the first time she felt the cold dread of suspicion. She never saw the earrings on anyone, and she buried the memory, telling herself it was a gift for his sister or a corporate partner. An explanation she desperately wanted to believe. Then came the late nights at the office, the unavoidable weekend trips to Singapore and Zurich. He was always a workaholic, but this was different. A new energy buzzed around him, a secret excitement that had nothing to do with her. He became more critical of her, of the softness of her philanthropic pursuits compared to his hard-nosed business world. "It's a lovely hobby, Isabella," he'd once said, patting her hand condescendingly after she'd secured a major grant for a new museum wing. "It keeps you busy." The final undeniable proof had come not from a lipstick-stained collar or a suspicious text message. Damien was far too clever for such cliches. It had come from his own meticulous obsession with control. About a month ago, she was searching for the title to their Hamptons estate for an insurance update. She went into his pristine home office, a room she rarely entered. The main safe was impenetrable, but he kept a smaller secondary one hidden behind a false panel in a bookshelf for what he called immediate liquidity, cash, a few bearer bonds, spare passports. She knew the combination. It was the date of his first major acquisition, a detail he was so proud of, he assumed no one would ever forget it. Inside, nestled between the stacks of $100 bills, was a leather-bound folio. It wasn't cash. It was a portfolio summary. But it wasn't for Blackwood Holdings. It was for a shell corporation she'd never heard of, Orion Ventures LLC. Curious, she'd taken photos of the pages with her phone. The portfolio detailed a series of staggering wire transfers, all coded as consulting fees, to a private account. The beneficiary's name was Amber Sterling. The transactions totaled over $2 million in the last year alone. It was more than hush money. It was an investment. But that wasn't the worst of it. The portfolio also showed Orion Ventures acquiring huge tracts of depreciated land along the Brooklyn waterfront. Land that was just last week announced as the site for the city's new Phoenix Waterfront Development Project, a multi-billion-dollar city-funded initiative. Blackwood Holdings was a major bidder for the construction contract. But they weren't just bidding. They had secretly and illegally bought the land beforehand through an anonymous shell set to make a 9-figure profit when the city was forced to buy it from them at an inflated price. And there at the bottom of the summary was the final nail in the coffin. A proposed transfer of 5% equity in Orion Ventures to Amber Sterling, contingent on the successful resolution of domestic encumbrances. Domestic encumbrances. That was her. Isabella Rossi Blackwood. A line item on a balance sheet, an obstacle to be resolved. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was building a new life with Amber, funded by a massive illegal fraud perpetrated against the very city they called home. His $1 million pledge to the Children's Fund tonight was a rounding error, a public relations stunt to mask a far greater theft. The memory solidified the ice in her veins. She looked at them, now dancing under the soft lights, embodying the beautiful lie. Damien's hand slid lower down Amber's back, a gesture of brazen possession. Amber glanced over his shoulder, her eyes meeting Isabella's for a fleeting second. In that glance, Isabella saw it all, the triumph, the condescension, the absolute certainty that she had won. Isabella took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne. The bubbles fizzed on her tongue. It was time. She spotted Marcus Thorne near the bar. Thorne was a bulldog of a different sort than her lawyer. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist for the Wall Street Journal, a man who smelled financial malfeasance the way a shark smelled blood in the water. She had met him at a press club dinner months ago, and they had struck up a cordial acquaintance. An anonymous source, her lawyer, speaking through a secure channel, had already tipped Thorne off that a major story might break tonight concerning Blackwood Holdings. He wasn't here for the charity, he was here for the hunt. His presence was part of her plan. Isabella put her glass down on a passing waiter's tray with a soft click. She smoothed the front of her gown, held her head high, and began to walk. She didn't walk toward the exit. She didn't walk toward her table. She walked toward the stage. The orchestra was just finishing its number. The band leader, a seasoned professional named Franklin, was raising his hand to signal the next piece. The gala's host, a well-known television news anchor, was approaching the lectern to begin the next round of fundraising appeals. But Isabella got there first. She moved with a regal purpose that parted the crowd. People stepped aside, confused but unwilling to get in the way of a woman who moved with such unnerving confidence. She ascended the 3 short steps to the stage as if she owned it. The host looked at her, bewildered. "Isabella, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. Isabella gave him a serene smile. "Perfectly, James. I just have a brief announcement to make on behalf of the Blackwood family." Before he could respond, she reached past him and took the microphone from its stand. She gripped its cool, heavy base. Her knuckles were white. The feedback let out a short, sharp screech that cut through the chatter of the room. Suddenly, all conversation stopped. Every head turned to the stage. On the dance floor, the music had faded. Damien and Amber stood frozen, their embrace broken. Damien's face was a mask of confusion, tinged with annoyance at having his moment interrupted. He was about to find out what a real interruption felt like. Isabella looked out at the sea of faces, the powerful, the influential, the complicit. She saw the flashes of phone cameras starting to go off, no longer subtle. She saw Marcus Thorne pushing his way to the front, his face alight with predatory focus. She took a deep breath, the silence of 1,000 people pressing in on her. She raised the microphone to her lips. The match was struck. Now it was time to light the fire. "Good evening," Isabella began, her voice as clear and steady as a news anchor's. It resonated through the grand hall, each syllable perfectly enunciated, betraying none of the turmoil that had been her life for the past year. The initial shock in the room settled into a tense, expectant silence. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to support the truly vital work of the Children's Oncology Fund. Your generosity is, as always, overwhelming." She paused, letting the polite, almost formal words hang in the air. She scanned the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the tables of bankers, politicians, and socialites. Then her eyes found Damien. He was still standing in the middle of the dance floor, Amber a few feet from him, looking uncertain. His expression had shifted from annoyance to a dawning, sharp-edged alarm. He knew her. He knew this placid calm was the most dangerous weapon in her arsenal. "My husband Damien Blackwood is celebrated for his generosity." Isabella continued, her tone smooth and conversational. "We all heard him pledge $1 million tonight, a grand gesture from a man of grand appetites." A light smattering of applause started, but it died quickly as Isabella's eyes hardened. "And his appetite for a grand gesture is on full display tonight, isn't it?" She gestured with her free hand, not accusatorily, but with the grace of a tour guide pointing out a landmark. Her gesture encompassed the dance floor, where Damien and Amber stood as if trapped in amber. "He brought his work with him this evening. I'm referring, of course, to Ms. Amber Sterling, his vice president of marketing." Amber flinched as if struck. Her face, moments ago flushed with triumph, was now chalk white. The name spoken so clearly and deliberately was a branding iron. "They make a lovely couple, don't you think?" Isabella's voice was light, but it carried a razor's edge. A wave of uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the audience. People were shifting in their seats, exchanging frantic, wide-eyed glances. This was no longer a simple faux pas. It was a public execution. Damien took a step forward, his face contorting into a thunderous mask of rage. "Isabella, what the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was a low growl, but it couldn't reach the stage. Isabella's eyes remained locked on his. "What am I doing, Damien? I'm simply admiring your dedication. It takes a special kind of man to flaunt his mistress in a dress likely paid for by a corporate expense account in front of his wife at a charity event she is co-chairing. He's not just a titan of industry, ladies and gentlemen. He's a titan of audacity." The truth so plainly stated was a gut punch. The murmurs exploded into audible gasps. The pretense of civility was shattered. The silent, shared secret of the New York elite was now a screaming headline. Amber looked desperately at Damien, as if expecting him to rescue her. But Damien was staring at Isabella, his mind clearly racing, trying to calculate the damage to find a way to spin this, to shut it down. Security personnel began moving tentatively toward the stage, looking to Damien for a signal. "But you know," Isabella said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the crowd in closer, "as shocking as that is, it isn't the most shocking thing I've discovered about my husband's business practices." This was the pivot, the kill shot. Damien froze. The blood drained from his face. This was not about the affair. This was about something else, something worse. "See, my husband is a visionary," Isabella said, a chilling smile touching her lips. "He doesn't just see the future, he rigs it. He has a passion project, a little side hustle. It's called Orion Ventures, LLC. She saw Marcus Thorne's pen scribbling furiously. She saw the city's deputy mayor, who was sitting at the head table, stiffen. Through Orion Ventures, a company conveniently hidden from Blackwood Holdings' public filings, my husband has been a very busy boy. For example, he spent the last 8 months using the Shell Corporation to acquire worthless, forgotten land along the Brooklyn waterfront. Imagine his surprise when just last week the city announced that very land was needed for the new Phoenix waterfront development. What a stroke of luck. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Blackwood Holdings is, of course, a primary bidder for that development contract. But the real genius is that the city will now have to purchase that land from an anonymous owner, Orion Ventures, at a markup of what my accountants estimate to be around $200 million. Your tax dollars working hard to make an honest billionaire even richer. The room was utterly silent now, the kind of silence that precedes a cataclysm. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was an accusation of massive criminal fraud. So when Damien pledges $1 million to sick children, Isabella's voice rose, filled with a righteous fire. Please know that it is merely a public relations write-off, a drop in the bucket of dirty water he is using to defraud the people of this city, the city he claims to love. She lowered the microphone slightly and her gaze found Amber Sterling one last time. Amber was staring at her no longer with pity but with sheer terror. She was implicated. She was the beneficiary. And as for Ms. Sterling, Isabella said, her voice dropping to an almost intimate whisper that the microphone carried to every corner of the room. Her loyalty was to be rewarded with more than just expensive jewelry. It was to be a 5% equity stake in this fraudulent enterprise contingent on the successful resolution of domestic encumbrances. That's me. I am the domestic encumbrance. She looked back at Damien, whose face was a terrifying canvas of pure, unrestrained fury. He was shouting now, his words lost in the cavernous space. Security, get her off that stage. Turn off her mic. But it was too late. The words were out. The matchstick had been dropped into the gasoline. Isabella raised the microphone for her final words. So, no, Damien, I will not be resolved. I will not be a silent partner to your corruption or your infidelity. This marriage is over, and your empire, it's about to be audited. With that, she calmly placed the microphone back on its stand. She turned, gave a brief, polite nod to the stunned host, and walked to the edge of the stage. The spell was broken. Chaos erupted. The moment Isabella placed the microphone in its stand, the dam of stunned silence broke, unleashing a tidal wave of pandemonium. The air, once filled with polite chatter, was now a cacophony of gasps, frantic whispers, and the unmistakable sound of chairs scraping against the marble floor as people scrambled for their phones. Damien Blackwood, a man accustomed to commanding any room he entered, was suddenly a powerless spectator at his own immolation. He lunged toward the stage, his face purple with rage, bellowing, "Turn it off, someone turn off her damn mic." But his orders were swallowed by the rising din. Two burly security guards, finally galvanized into action, moved to intercept him, while another pair rushed the stage. Isabella didn't run. She met the security guards at the steps, her expression one of serene composure. "Gentlemen, there's no need for force. I'm leaving," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. They hesitated, clearly uncertain how to handle the wife of the man who signed their paychecks. It was all the time she needed. She descended the stairs with the same regal grace with which she had ascended them, not as a woman being removed, but as a queen abdicating a corrupt throne. The crowd parted for her as if she were Moses and they the Red Sea. Pitying looks had been replaced by expressions of awe, shock, and for some of the wives who knew the sting of infidelity, a grim vicarious satisfaction. As she walked, she could hear the frantic clicks of phone cameras capturing her exit for eternity. Her path was a direct line to the main entrance, a walk of liberation. She didn't look back. Meanwhile, the scene she left behind had devolved into a circus. Marcus Thorne, the journalist, was already dictating into his phone, his voice sharp and urgent. "Get me everything on Orion Ventures LLC. I want incorporation docs, property records in Brooklyn, everything. The source just went nuclear. This is the real deal." Damien, having been gently but firmly restrained by his own security, was now frantically trying to do damage control. He ripped his phone from his pocket, his thumb jabbing at the screen. "Get me Henderson," he snarled at his chief legal counsel. "Now, and get our PR head on the line. I want a statement ready in 5 minutes. Deny everything. Paint her as unstable, vindictive, emotionally distraught. Go." But the narrative was already out of his control. Before his PR team could even draft a sentence, the first social media posts were hitting the ether. Blackwood Ball and Orion Ventures were trending on Twitter within minutes. Grainy videos of Isabella's speech captured from a dozen different angles were being uploaded to Instagram and YouTube, spreading like wildfire. The story was no longer his to shape. It was a beast let loose upon the world. Amber Sterling was a ghost in the center of the storm. The emerald dress that had been her armor of triumph now felt like a shroud of humiliation. Every eye in the room seemed to burn into her. She was no longer Damian Blackwood's powerful protege. She was the Scarlet Woman, the co-conspirator named in a public indictment. People who had been flattering her an hour earlier now averted their gaze, backing away as if she were contagious. She looked toward Damian for some sign, some instruction, but he was lost in his own vortex of fury and damage control, screaming into his phone. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. She turned and fled, not with the grace of Isabella, but with the panicked haste of a cornered animal stumbling in her high heels as she pushed her way through the gawking crowd toward a side exit. As Isabella reached the grand marble rotunda, a figure stepped out from behind a large column. It was Arthur Vance, her lawyer. He was a stern-looking man in his late 60s with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. "The car is waiting at the east entrance," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The press is already swarming the front. Marcus Thorne's outlet just published the preliminary story online. It's leading with the fraud allegations. The affair is the secondary detail." Isabella nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Good, that was the point. The documents have been delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC an hour ago via secure courier." Arthur continued, falling into step beside her. "They were waiting for a public catalyst before moving to prevent Damian from bearing everything. You just gave them an explosion." They exited into the cool night air, bypassing the chaos at the main entrance. A black town car was idling by the curb, its engine a quiet hum. Before she got in, Isabella paused and looked back at the magnificent museum, now the scene of her life's demolition and reconstruction. For the first time that night, a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or regret. It was a tear of release. Inside the gala, the event was collapsing. Guests were leaving in droves, eager to escape the toxic fallout and gossip about it from a safe distance. The children's charity, the supposed reason for the evening, was forgotten. Damian, finally off the phone, stood amidst the wreckage of his own making. The room felt vast and empty. The applause, the adoration, the power, it had all evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. He had been the emperor. Now he was just a man standing in the ruins, exposed and vulnerable, as the world he had built with lies began to shatter around him. The fallout from the Starlight Gala was not a slow burn. It was a detonation. By 7:00 a.m. the next morning, the story was on the front page of every major news outlet in the world. The Wall Street Journal, led by Marcus Thorne's explosive reporting, focused on the financial allegations, running the headline, "Blackwood Empire Rocked by Fraud Accusations. Wife's Gala Speech Alleges Massive City Defrauding Scheme." Other, more tabloid-style papers went for the jugular on the personal drama, "Billionaire's Ball of Shame. Wife exposes husband and mistress in charity takedown." The effect on Blackwood Holdings was immediate and catastrophic. When the New York Stock Exchange opened at 9:30 a.m., its stock plummeted by 40% within the first hour of trading. Billions of dollars in market value vanished into thin air. Damian's frantic denials, issued through a high-price crisis PR firm, were dismissed as the predictable lies of a guilty man. His statement, painting Isabella as emotionally unstable and seeking leverage in a private marital dispute, backfired spectacularly, making him look not only corrupt but also cruel and misogynistic. Isabella, in contrast, remained silent, sequestered with her legal team, a silence that amplified her credibility. Within 48 hours, the official machinery of justice spurred into action by Isabella's public accusations, and the documents delivered by her lawyer began to grind. Subpoenas were issued by both the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Federal agents raided the offices of Blackwood Holdings, and more importantly, the much smaller, nondescript office of Orion Ventures LLC in Delaware, carting out boxes of documents and imaging computer hard drives. Damian's world began to shrink. The powerful friends who had once clamored for his attention now refused to take his calls. The politicians he had backed distanced themselves publicly. The board of directors of Blackwood Holdings, initially loyal, began to panic as the stock price continued to freefall. They convened an emergency meeting and, in a unanimous vote, placed Damian on an indefinite leave of absence and stripped him of his role as CEO, installing a temporary replacement to try and stop the bleeding. For Amber Sterling, the fall was even faster and more brutal. She was fired from her position as VP of Marketing via a cold 2-sentence email from Human Resources. She was named in the federal subpoenas as a person of interest. Her own assets were frozen as they were now considered potential proceeds of crime. The media camped outside her luxury apartment building, turning her into a caricature of the home-wrecking corporate climber. The $2 million consulting fees and the promise of 5% equity in Orion Ventures were no longer a golden parachute, but a lead weight dragging her to the bottom. Desperate, she tried to contact Damien, but her calls went straight to voicemail. She had been a co-conspirator in his ascent, and now she was collateral damage in his fall. The investigation moved with relentless speed. The documents Isabella had photographed in the safe were the roadmap. Forensic accountants from the FBI unraveled the complex web of transactions, confirming every one of Isabella's allegations. The land purchases, the shell company, the planned sale to the city. It was a classic brazen case of insider dealing and public fraud. A week after the gala, Marcus Thorne published a follow-up story that detailed the human cost of the Phoenix waterfront scheme. The depreciated land Damien had bought up was not entirely empty. It included several low-income apartment buildings and small family-owned businesses that were being forced out through aggressive predatory tactics employed by Orion Ventures representatives. Suddenly, Damien wasn't just a white-collar criminal, he was a villain who preyed on the vulnerable. Isabella watched the unraveling from a secure hotel suite under the protection of a private security team. She was not celebrating. There was a somber weight to her victory. She had loved Damien once a long time ago, before his ambition had consumed his soul. Tearing him down was not a joyous act, but a necessary one. She cooperated fully with the investigators, providing them with a detailed timeline of her discoveries and turning over the original photographs from her phone. Her public image was transformed overnight. She was no longer just a society wife. She was hailed as a courageous whistleblower. Feminist blogs wrote editorials praising her for refusing to be a silent victim. Financial watchdogs lauded her for exposing a level of corporate corruption that often went unchecked. She had used the public's obsession with a salacious affair as a Trojan horse to deliver a much more important truth about power and greed. 2 months after that fateful night at the Met, the U.S. attorney held a press conference. Standing before a bank of microphones, he announced a sweeping 22-count indictment against Damien Blackwood, including charges of wire fraud securities, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. A warrant was issued for his arrest. The images that flashed across the news that afternoon were surreal. Damien Blackwood, the man who once graced the cover of Forbes, was shown in handcuffs being led from his Park Avenue penthouse by FBI agents. His face was pale, his arrogant smirk replaced by a look of dazed disbelief. He had truly believed he was untouchable. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had married, seeing her grace as weakness and her silence as submission. He never realized that beneath the Oscar de la Renta and the quiet dignity, Isabella Rossi Blackwood was forged from something far stronger than steel a conscience. 6 months later, the New York City winter had settled in, blanketing the city in a cold, clean layer of snow. The world of Damien Blackwood had been irrevocably altered. He was out on a $10 million bail, his passport surrendered, his assets almost entirely frozen by the federal government. Blackwood Holdings, under new leadership, was in the process of a painful restructuring, selling off assets to cover the massive fines levied against it and to distance itself from the toxic legacy of its founder. The Phoenix waterfront development project was scrapped, and a new investigation was launched into the city officials who had championed it. Amber Sterling, after a period of public disgrace, had accepted a plea deal. In exchange for her full cooperation and testimony against Damien, she would plead guilty to a lesser charge, avoiding a long prison sentence, but ensuring her career in high finance was permanently over. Her name became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and business schools. And Isabella, she was no longer Isabella Rossi Blackwood. She was Isabella Rossi. She had shed the name that had become synonymous with scandal and had reclaimed her own powerful heritage. She did not retreat into a quiet private life. Instead, she stepped into the light, but on her own terms. She used a portion of her divorce settlement, a settlement dictated not by Damien, but by the courts carved from the few legally clean assets he had left, to establish the Rossi Foundation for Corporate and Civic Integrity. Its mission was to fund investigative journalism, support whistleblowers, and advocate for more transparent governance. She was no longer just a philanthropist who raised money for hospitals. She was a force for systemic change, using her experience to empower others. Her office was not on Park Avenue, but in a modest, light-filled space in a repurposed downtown building. Today she was meeting with Marcus Thorne. The journalist series on the Blackwood scandal had won him another prestigious award. The trial is set for April, Marcus told her, sipping the coffee she had poured herself. His lawyers will try to delay, but the evidence is overwhelming, especially with Sterling's testimony. Isabella nodded, looking out the window at the bustling street below. She was a victim in her own way, a victim of the same ambition that consumed him. There was no malice in her voice, only a quiet, objective sadness. You've never once spoken to the press about the affair itself. Marcus noted a hint of professional curiosity in his tone. Every talk show in the country would have you. Isabella turned from the window, a small, genuine smile on her face. That was never the point, Marcus. The affair was his story, his betrayal, the fraud, the lies that hurt thousands of people. Making that public was my story. It was about accountability. The rest was just noise. She had found a new purpose forged in the crucible of betrayal. Her life was no longer an appendage to a powerful man's ego. It was her own. She was not defined by the man she had left, but by the woman she had become. The Starlight Gala had been the end of a gilded chapter, but it was also the beginning of a truer, more meaningful story. A story she was now writing for herself, one courageous and honest word at a time. The dawn was breaking, and for Isabella Rossi, the light was brilliant. The following spring, the city had shed its winter coat, but the chill inside the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse remained. The trial of the United States versus Damian Blackwood had become the biggest spectacle in Manhattan, a piece of civic theater drawing a daily crowd of reporters, legal junkies, and curious onlookers. The prosecution had spent 3 weeks methodically constructing a mountain of evidence against Damian, financial records expert testimony from forensic accountants, and damning emails retrieved from seized servers. They had shown the jury in painstaking detail how Orion Ventures was not a stroke of luck, but a meticulously planned criminal enterprise. Damian Blackwood sat at the defense table, a hollowed-out version of the man he once was. The bespoke suits hung loosely on a frame diminished by stress. The confident, predatory gleam in his eyes had been replaced by the haunted, desperate look of a man watching his life's work being dismantled, piece by incriminating piece. His team of expensive lawyers fought every point, but they were like men trying to patch a sinking ship with Scotch tape. Isabella Rossi sat in the second row of the public gallery. She had attended every day of the trial, a silent, constant presence. She wore simple, elegant business attire, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. She was not there for vengeance. She was there as a witness to the final act of a tragedy she had been forced to write. Her presence was a quiet counterpoint to every lie Damian's lawyers tried to spin, a living embodiment of the integrity he had so casually discarded. Today was the day everyone had been waiting for. The prosecution was calling its final and most crucial witness to the stand, Amber Sterling. When Amber walked into the courtroom, she was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the fiery, ambitious VP in a designer dress. In her place was a subdued woman in a simple gray suit, her blonde hair tied back in a modest ponytail. Her face was pale, and she avoided looking at Damian as she made her way to the witness stand. She looked directly at the assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria Flores. Flores began gently establishing Amber's role at Blackwood Holdings and the nature of her professional and personal relationship with the defendant. Amber's voice was low but steady as she answered, admitting to the affair without embellishment. Ms. Sterling Flores said, her tone becoming more focused. Let's talk about Orion Ventures. When did you first learn of its existence? In May of last year, Amber replied. Damian, Mr. Blackwood, called me into his private office one evening. He told me he was working on a personal project separate from the company that was going to be the most profitable deal of his life. He said he wanted me to be a part of it. Did he explain the nature of this project? Yes. He laid it all out. He said he had inside information that the city was planning a major waterfront redevelopment. He was creating a shell company to buy the designated land before the official announcement. He called it front-running the entire city government. He was proud of it. He saw it as the ultimate power move. A murmur went through the courtroom. Damian whispered furiously to his lawyer, shaking his head. And what was your role to be, Miss Sterling? He needed a clean name, someone not on the Blackwood board to act as a signatory and beneficiary on some of the accounts. He said he would compensate me with consulting fees for my trouble, and he offered me equity. Equity in Orion Ventures. Flores asked, her voice sharp. What were the terms of that offer? Amber took a deep breath, her eyes finally flicking toward Isabella for a fraction of a second. He promised me 5%, but it was contingent. He said it would be transferred upon the successful resolution of his domestic encumbrances. And what did you understand domestic encumbrances to mean? His marriage, Amber said, her voice barely a whisper. He meant a divorce from his wife, Isabella. Flores let the words hang in the air before turning to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Now it was the defense's turn. Damien's lead counsel, a famously aggressive attorney named Robert Gaines, approached the witness stand. His strategy was clear: destroy the witness's credibility by painting her as a scorned, greedy woman trying to save her own skin. Miss Sterling Gaines began, his voice dripping with condescension. You had an affair with a married man, your boss, correct? Yes, Amber said quietly. And you accepted millions of dollars from him during this affair, didn't you? They were payments for work he asked me to do for Orion Ventures. Work, Gaines scoffed. Or were they gifts, payments to keep you quiet? Payments for your companionship? Objection, Flores called out. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge said wearily. Mr. Gaines, watch your tone. Gaines circled the stand. You were in love with him, weren't you? Ms. Sterling, you believed he was going to leave his wife for you, didn't you? Amber hesitated. I believed what he told me. And when you saw that wasn't happening, when Mrs. Rossi Blackwood exposed the affair so publicly, at that gala, you got scared, didn't you? You saw your meal ticket about to be canceled and you decided to turn on him to get a deal from the prosecution. No, Amber said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. That's not true, isn't it? You're facing serious charges yourself. This testimony is your get-out-of-jail-free card, isn't it? Just tell the jury whatever Ms. Flores wants to hear and you walk away. I am here to tell the truth, Amber insisted, her hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. Gaines leaned in, lowering his voice for theatrical effect. Let's talk about the truth of that night, Mistress Sterling. The Starlight Gala. You wore a very memorable emerald dress. A dress I imagine that Mr. Blackwood bought for you. Did you wear it to impress him, or did you wear it to humiliate the woman sitting in the second row? His wife. This was the moment. The final personal attack. Amber looked at Gaines, and something inside her seemed to shift. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a cold fire. She sat up straighter. Mr. Gaines, yes, he bought me the dress. He bought me many things. He created a fantasy, and I was foolish enough to want to live in it. I made terrible, unethical personal choices, and I will live with the shame of that for the rest of my life. I hurt a good woman, and I allowed myself to be used. She paused, taking a breath, and then turned her gaze to the jury. But my personal failings do not change the numbers in the ledgers. My affair does not make the wire transfers legal. My foolishness does not erase the conspiracy to defraud this city out of hundreds of millions of dollars. Robert Gaines is asking you to believe that because I slept with Damien Blackwood, I am somehow responsible for his crimes. That my sin of adultery is equal to his felonies. It is not. Her voice was now strong, clear, and resonant. He didn't just manipulate me. He manipulated the market, he manipulated city officials, and he tried to manipulate all of you. The man sitting at that table is a predator, not of women, but of systems. He sees laws, regulations, and people as mere obstacles to his own enrichment. He believes he is above everything. That is the truth I am here to tell. And it is the same truth whether I am wearing a gray suit or an emerald dress. She finished, her chest rising and falling. The courtroom was silent. Gaines stood flat-footed, his attack completely diffused. He had tried to slut-shame her into submission, and instead she had delivered the most compelling indictment of Damien's character yet. No further questions, he mumbled, retreating to the defense table. As Amber Sterling stepped down from the stand, she did not look at Damien. Her journey was over. Across the room, Isabella Rossi's eyes met Damien's for one final fleeting moment. She saw no fight left in him, only the blank, hollow shock of a man who had finally been forced to look in the mirror and see the monster staring back. Isabella stood her poise absolute. She didn't need to stay to hear the verdict announced in the coming days. She already knew it. With a quiet grace, she turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the wreckage of Damian Blackwood's world behind her for the last time. The reckoning was complete. The story of Isabella Rossi is more than a tale of a billionaire's downfall. It's a powerful reminder that true strength often lies dormant, waiting for its moment. She turned her deepest personal betrayal into a public service, using the scandal of an affair as a weapon to expose a far greater crime against her city. She proves that one person's courage can indeed topple an empire built on lies. What would you have done in her shoes? Could you find that strength in the face of such public humiliation and private pain? If you were captivated by this story of justice and reclamation, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that silence is not the only option. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas where the truth comes out in the most explosive ways. Click the bell icon so you never miss a single story.